Would you state your name, please?
John T. Uldrich, Sr.
And is this your first visit to the museum?
Absolutely first visit. I did not know it was here. I've been connected to Minneapolis and St. Paul for close to X years.
And what is it that drew you to your interest to come to this museum?
Through an article in Minnesota History magazine, I understood more about the relationship of Northwest to the mod program of World War II, which was done over at Holman. And like most trips into history, you learn more history. And I learned some things here from our host, Wayne Snyder, who runs this museum, that in effect there's some history that connects Northwest Orient to the Doolittle program, which I had no idea was the fact, and I will add that to my research.
Would you state your name?
Wayne Snyder.
And we're here at the Northwest History Center. Could you tell me what your position is?
I'm Vice President of Operations at the NWA History Center.
And how long did you work for Northwest?
I worked at Northwest for a little over 44 years.
And what positions did you have with the company?
The first 25 years I was a mechanic, radio electronics mechanic, crew chief on the ramp. I was chief on the ramp, Red Concourse for 14 years on third shift.
How long have you been involved with the History Center here?
I'm involved at the History Center now almost 10 years. Okay, today we're going to go take a short tour through the NWA History Center. And the NWA History Center is dedicated to keeping alive the history of Northwest Airlines, helping in research, and just being a place where people can come and enjoy looking through the artifacts we have from Northwest Airlines. Northwest NWA History Center has been here since 2002, and right now we can't expand anymore. In the future, we're hoping to be over on the Fort Snelling reservation in a new building, in a different building, and have a lot more area to display what we have. We have so much stuff in reserve and packed away that we can't show right now.
How many people would you estimate have actually come through the museum up to this point?
Up to this point, we've been open 11 years now, and probably, let's see, probably around 60,000 people have come through the museum. Northwest started because of airmail route number 9, Chicago to Minneapolis, was open, and Colonel Britton got on the ball and got things rolling, and had the winning bid for the airlines, or airways at that time, and established Northwest Airways strictly for mail. It was not till the next year that they carried their first passenger, who flew from here to Chicago, and it took them 12 and a half hours to get there. But you understand, at that time the main idea was to collect the mail, and so you stopped several places to pick up mail and drop off mail, and also to refuel the aircraft.
You've got a Ford Trimotor.
The Ford Trimotor was one of the real modern airplanes at that time. It could carry 8 people, and you were inside. It was a relatively, for that day and age, quiet aircraft. The airplane next to it is a Sikorsky S-38, and we had amphibious airplanes for 2 years because we carried the mail to Duluth, the international mail, and they had no airport, so we landed in the harbor in Duluth and picked up the passengers and the mail over on the sand spit that's between Superior and Duluth right now.
And this is Amelia Earhart's Lodestar?
Well, the bottom one, the A-10, yeah, the 10A down there is the one that Amelia Earhart had. The little white and black one, we had that only for a short time because it's a single-engine propeller-driven airplane, and just after that came out, the government decided that if you're going to carry passengers, you have to have a multi-engine aircraft, so that didn't last very long.
thing I remember about these is they had wicker seats in a lot of
Yes,
them.
they had wicker seats in them. We had a model of our first airplane that we actually owned. It was the Stetson Detroiter, and the unique thing about that is both the passengers and the pilot were inside. It's a biplane, it carried 6 people, and it was modern for its day. One of the people that helped start Northwest Airlines was Speed Holman, and Speed Holman was a acrobatic pilot. He was also a very good pilot. He was our first operational manager. He unfortunately died in a crash in Omaha when his seatbelt broke and he fell out of the airplane while he was upside down in front of the crowd.
Ouch. That could ruin your whole day.
Yeah, it ruined his day, that's for sure.
Did Chamberlain, who the airport was also named for out of World War I, did he ever have any connection with?
He never had any connection. Wold Chamberlain Field is named for 2 people, Wold and Chamberlain. They were both Minnesota pilots that went to World War I, and both got killed in France. And they never had any connection at all with Northwest Airlines.
You have a library, you have a store where aviation items can be purchased. Pins, labels.
Caps, some
maybe-
textiles, books.
So if you come here, you can walk away with memories that you can wear or put on your cap.
Right, yeah, yes you can. Every time a city established a new route, why they would the post office would issue those. Some of that stuff is things that were given to customers over the years. The boomerang was when we were in Australia for the short time we were there. Things like the fans that came on your.
What period of time was Australia?
It was 1980s. We weren't there. They battled for it for a long time, and it was not economical, and we never didn't continue it very long.
When did you start flying passengers into the Orient, particularly Japan?
Well, it was after the war.
Tell me about, as we're going through here, when it's appropriate, what the development of your philosophy of stewards and stewardesses was all about. Because if I recall correctly, Northwest was considered a leader in how stewards and stewardesses were used.
Okay.
Am I correct?
The thing about the steward was that they were on board early in the years because they didn't allow the stewardess, the female flight attendant, to handle money or the liquor. And when we started flying to the Orient, the Oriental men would not pay attention to a woman. So they had to have that male authority on the airplane.
Interesting.
And we still have one of the original stewards flying yet today. He's almost 90, but he still flies.
Now, did you require the stewardesses to be nurses at the very beginning?
We did. Everybody did at the start, and I don't think that lasted very long because it wasn't too long after the war, probably after World War II, that was dropped, along with not being able to fly after you were married. So this area is the next era in our aircraft, and basically from the 1930s through the probably about the mid to late 70s. It includes the DC-3s, which came just before the war, and then the Air Force took most of them. I think they left them 2 or 3 airplanes. The DC-4s, of course, came after the war. The Stratocruiser, the DC-6, DC-7, Constellation, they were all in the same areas, the 50s, when the propeller-driven airplane was reaching its ultimate best performance, carrying the most people. After that, the Electra turboprop came in, and then right after that, in the early 60s, the jet airplanes came in. The first airplane jet airplane that Northwest had was the DC-8, and it had pure turbojet engines on it. The problem with it is that it didn't have the range to fly from Anchorage to Tokyo nonstop. We still had to stop on the Aleutians to refuel. And so when Boeing came out with their 320Bs with the fan jet engines, then we could fly nonstop Anchorage to Tokyo all the time. So.
Constellation rings a bell. That was Minneapolis to New York when I was about 19 years old, and I can still remember the plush leather and great comfort and outstanding stewardess services.
Northwest had them for only 2 years. NYROP didn't like them because he really liked Douglas airplanes. Mr. Douglas had helped him out when he first became president of Northwest Airlines. Mr. NYROP had gone to the Douglas Corporation and was going to buy 4 airplanes. And Mr. Douglas told Mr. NYROP, you need 6. And he says, I know, but I don't have the money. And Mr. Douglas told Mr. NYROP, he says, you'll get your 6 airplanes, and when you get the money, you pay me. And it was a handshake. And Mr. NYROP used to tell that story.
Yes.
And so he really liked, and Douglas built an excellent airplane, there's no doubt about it. When Mr. NYROP had to go with the 707 over the Douglas DC-8, he said that was one of his most difficult decisions. But he talked to Mr. Douglas, and he says, Mr. Douglas says, I don't have the airplane you need. We're businessmen. You need, you go where you find the product you need. So after that, we pretty much were a Boeing airline. Although we did get the DC-10 later, which turned out to be a pretty nice airplane. So.
Moneymaker.
Yeah. It had 88 seats, all first class. Had 14 berths in it that you could rent. Had a downstairs lounge where the bar was. It was really a nice riding airplane. It was heavy. Basically, it's a B-29 bomber with a big upper lobe on it for passengers. The engine's tail and stuff are all the same.
That's something I've never heard. It was a B-29 mainframe converted.
Yep, and Boeing did that to keep their engineering staff busy while they developed the jet airplanes. Started with the military and then moved on.
It's been a good day. I've learned something.
These are interesting in that this is how your food came on the airplane. Before refrigeration, it was it's just a big vacuum jar basically, and the plates or the food would fit in there, either hot or cold, and then you brought it on the airplane that way, and that's before they had big galleys and refrigeration and ovens and all that stuff that they have nowadays. And over here we have uniforms, what they call the Caterpillar uniform, which didn't last very long. If you notice on all the other uniforms, Northwest had their solid colors, and somehow that one got accepted.
So that was short run.
Short run, and yeah. A lot of airlines got folded into Northwest when Northwest bought Republic. But before that, of course, North Central and Northwest were competitors at Minneapolis, and did compete on some routes. But we like to have a place to honor those airlines also. And so the first part here is North Central, I worked with a lot of people, you know, in later years that worked for North Central. I flew them a lot because they went to my hometown,
Which was?
Watertown, South Dakota.
Watertown.
Yeah. In this cabinet now, we kind of starting to transition a little more toward the Republic. It's still mostly North Central, but North Central started out as Wisconsin Central, flying from Chicago up through the Fox River Valley with little Beechcraft Bobcats. And when they decided they wanted to expand, they moved to Minneapolis and became North Central. And through the years, gradually they got huge. They were the biggest regional airline in the United States. And then they bought Southern and North Central went together and became Republic. When that happened, they changed the name because they didn't want either airline to be the dominant airline, so they changed the name. And then over the years, Republic bought Hughes Air West after Howard Hughes died. They bought Hughes Air West, and when Hughes Air West came in, all of these other airlines that had been West Coast regionals and local feeder airlines. There's a good history there.
This over here is the route?
That was the route pretty much before North Central and Southern went together. After they did, this became the route map of Republic. North Central and Republic's logo was Herman the Blue Goose. And there's different stories, of course, how they got the emblem. We won't go into that, but this fella here was used at their company parties, and somebody would dress up in that thing, and it's styrofoam and fuzz, and it must have been a horrendously hot uniform to wear, but that's what it was used for. So somebody would be in there, and that was their mascot. So we don't want to shortchange Herman here. So for us, we had a lot of pictures, a lot of forms. There's everything here from World War II up through the modern history of the center here. This book here is on Shimia, which is where you stop to refuel on the way to the Orient. It was on the end of the Aleutian Islands. And since the airplanes couldn't make it all the way, that was the refueling station.
Do I understand that that's one of the places up there where the windsock was actually made out of a chain?
Well, it could be, yeah. I tell people it was the garden spot of the Northern Pacific because 3 different weather systems come together there. So rain, fog, and sleet were common, let's put it that way. Once in a while you got to see the sun, but it was not a nice place. And I did, when I started, I actually worked with people, and you'd go there for several months at a time. It was temporary duty, and once you got there, you stayed there. And we interviewed Phyllis Curry, who was a cabin attendant on the first flights into the Orient. Mm-hmm. And so she was the only female on the island, so they had a special place in the station manager's hut for her to stay the 2 days that she overnighted there, or stayed there. And I asked her, I said, did they have armed guards in front of the door? And she said, well, it didn't get that bad, but she was the only female on the island, so. Yeah, this pretty much shows just our Orient startup. As you can see, there's a TWA airplane. There's a Delta airplane, and when Northwest started this at the request of the government, we didn't have the airplanes to fly that, so we leased airplanes from those airlines and then used our pilots so that we could start this run to the Orient, to Tokyo. And the thing is that it was a couple of 3 years before just regular passengers Of course, the country was under military, our military rule, so. This shows some of the setups. One thing that we would like to do someday is have a complete set of all the setups that Northwest had. That's a first-class service in the 1980s. One of our board members is Al Caribou, who was director of food services at that time, and so he knows a lot about it, and we're trying to get the collection going. Down there was, on the bottom is different bowls and things that we used just on the Orient flights.
Wayne, you weren't kidding. There's a photo of Shima, and I see all kinds of huts there.
Yes, well, that was a military base during the war.
It looks like
And it was
a military base.
it was a military base, and they didn't upgrade it a whole lot.
And the livery here is they would switch as they got closer to Japan?
Well, we think, or we're not positive about these, but we think these were actually for sale as kind of like a souvenir on an Orient flight. We're not, we really haven't nailed that down yet, but there's people that told us that, and I think Phyllis Curry was one of them. She's recently passed away, but on those flights, you could buy these things as a souvenir. Okay, at the Spokane World's Fair, Northwest Airlines had located a junk in China and brought it over, and that was our display at the World's Fair in Spokane. And it still exists. Somebody still lives on it. It's been moved around quite a bit, but we understand it's back in probably Pocatello, Idaho, and the person that owns it actually lives on it, so that's the last we've heard.
On a lake?
Yeah, on a lake,
Pocatello?
probably not, it's a lake there by Pocatello, Idaho.
And posters from the,
A lot of travel posters. We have hundreds of them in our collection. We can only show a few. People ask us about buying them, and we're not sure that, because of copyright things, we're not sure. So until we get that straightened out, we're working on that. Some people want to copy them, and here again, it's a copyright situation that we don't know just where we stand with it. We have tons of big models, 747 400s. Probably have 8 or 10 of those of that size. This coat here is has an interesting story behind it. When Rothmeyer, who was the president at the time, went out and looked at the 747s and Boeing's idea of what the seat should look like, Mr. Rothmeyer said that that material looked like it would make a nice sports coat. So unbeknownst to him, they got his measurements and stuff, and when we took delivery of the first 747-400, they presented Mr. Rothmeyer with a sports coat made from the material that was the seat covers. So I doubt that he ever wore it, but
Is this the actual coat?
yeah, that's his coat. Yeah, that's the actual
It
coat.
doesn't look like it. Got a lot
And the
of
actual
wear.
material that the seat covers were made from.
Or he was absolutely right, and he's probably got 1,000 hours on this, but no wear and tear.
Yeah, could be. This is the same lady. She was a British subject, and she started out at Southwest Airlines. And through the acquisitions, and as the airlines combined, that's all of the airlines she worked for until she retired at Northwest Airlines. And
That is a really amazing.
it is. She had an amazing
history.
career. And actually what it is, it's the uniforms are on mannequins, and she just had her head put on all of the mannequins because some of the really weird positions of the hands.
Uh-huh.
She was here about 4 years. She lives in California. As far as I know, she's still alive. But she had an amazing career. The Howard Hughes Air West, Howard liked yellow, and so their airplanes were yellow and their uniforms were yellow. So
A lot of different hairdos too.
yeah, yeah.
And then of course I remember the big blue fonts there.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't very well put a cap on that.
Yes. This was the most modern and up-to-date communications equipment. It was teletype machines. And when I was chief on the ramp, we had 4 of them like that without the keyboard. And I'd watch them all night long for watching for my flights that came in the morning to see if there was maintenance on them. But that was the latest and greatest.
Would the pilots actually send their squawk?
Well, the pilots would talk to
lists and
dispatch, and then the dispatcher had a feed over to the ladies that did the teletyping, and they would type.
clean up the message.
Well, some of them weren't cleaned up too good. We'd pretty much get them the way they said them. This is just old desks. When we really got modern, we got radios in the airplane, our vehicles, on our tugs, so we could talk to the tower as well as the airplane through the interphone. This picture here was taken over in St. Paul. It's a Lockheed Zephyr being repaired. This was this is in Minneapolis on the hangars on 34th Avenue. And Northwest was instrumental in a lot of experimental things. One thing we did with Mayo Clinic was they developed a oxygen system that each passenger wore before the airplanes were pressurized. Each passenger wore their own mask that fed off the system, and that way they could fly over the mountains instead of through the passes to get from like Billings to Spokane.
Mm-hmm.
So, and during the war, they did a lot of experimenting with anti-ice equipment here at Minneapolis. The DuPont hangars up on 34th in Crosstown, that the hangar used to be there, they'd hang an airplane in there, and they had this huge lightning generator, and that's where they developed some of the static wicks and how to get rid of the static electricity on airplanes.
Do you remember that doctor's name from the university that ran those?
I do not. I've read his name and I don't remember it.
Well, then they had, apropos of that, up on Highway 218,
yeah.
They had that Lockheed hanging there,
Mm-hmm.
right among all of the things, and that was for lightning.
That was
strike.
also
Yeah.
lightning, and I don't know if that was a separate project or not, but I remember that
I
airplane
don't
being
think
up
it
there.
was, and I remember looking at it because I was gonna make a bid on the aircraft.
Uh-huh,
And the Air Force says, oh, that's ours, and we're getting it back.
yes.
And then it just disappeared one day.
Well, the Air Force doesn't ever give anything away, you know.
That's right.
Okay, we'll go out,
Give it away.
let's go back out in the main museum, and,
Wayne, that's, this part of it is really another big part of my connection with Northwest Orient, because when I was in business, bringing product in from Asia, from Japan,
uh-huh,
over a period of 15 years, brought in millions of dollars worth of electronic gear, and it was all Northwest.
mm-hmm. One of the problems with Holman Field was it's on the Mississippi River, and it would flood every once in a while, and that's one reason they moved to Minneapolis, to get rid of that, but also to get a bigger spot. At Northwest's 30th anniversary, they leased back one of their Ford tri-motors from the Williams brothers in Billings, Montana, and painted it with Northwest, and flew the route from Chicago out to Seattle again, as the tri-motors did. And you can see the Stratocruiser, which was the newest and greatest airplane on the fleet at that time.
Yeah, that wasn't the president. Okay. By the way, if you want an emotive vignette, get Flo and have her tell you, she says she gets tongue-tied when she starts talking about the experiences that she had flying veterans in and out of, say, Kuwait. Those are stories that ought to be archived.
Yeah.
And I think only somebody who'd been there looking at these young Marines and soldiers and sailors, looking at them going in and then looking at them coming out.
Coming out,
I mean, that, she did about a 3-minute shtick on that. It was beautiful.
And this cabinet here, during the war, Northwest Airlines ran the B-24 Mod Center here in Minneapolis, and we converted over 3,000 B-24s. They'd come out of the factory as a generic airplane. If they needed more guns, radars, fuel tanks, then they did that at Minneapolis.
And these were mostly out of Willow Run, correct?
Yes, yes. Okay. And they produce a B-24 once an hour, and they didn't slow down the factory to make mods there.
How often did you see women pilots, the WAFs coming in?
Well, I was very young at the war. I didn't see any, and I didn't see any Northwest pilots until in the late 70s at Northwest. But after that, there's been a lot of pilots. But I never, I was too young in the war years to see that.
Let's talk about this one for just a moment, because this came up in the article with a little bit of history that I didn't know, and it's that they had a way of taking that bottom turret out of there, and in this article, that was well done, is they replaced it with a high-performance radar, which was extremely valuable in the later days in Europe for its ground mapping capability. And for me, it answered a question, because I had done some research on a B-24 that left one of the last of the B-24s that left the your mod center. It took off at night, and the pilot got a little nervous and tried to land it on the Mississippi River down on Lake Pepin.
Oh, really?
And then I looked at the rest of the research, and it showed that the Air Force really went all out to recover that particular bomber. And I think now I know why. It was
because of the radar.
The radar device. It wasn't the Norden bomb sight.
Yeah.
I don't know, did you install Norden?
Well, the Norden bomb sight did get installed by Northwest. And the stories that I was told was that they were stored in a vault below the hangars on 34th Avenue. There was a 24-hour armed guard on them, and only certain people were ever allowed there.
Wait a minute, I'll run that by me again. They were stored in vaults beneath 34th Avenue.
The hangars on 34th Avenue.
Oh, and there were vaults in these hangars?
Yeah, underneath the floors of the hangars.
Okay.
And that's where the Norden bomb sites were stored.
Are those vaults still there?
I have no idea. I never got to work on the 34th Avenue's hangars, because when I joined Northwest, the new facility was being built, and I moved from St. Paul over into that new, but I did work with a lot of guys that had worked in those hangars.
Another interesting point that this young fellow wrote up in his article was that not Honeywell, but Northwest actually did modifications on a group of B-25s.
Yes, they did.
Which were then, it was done for the RAF, the British, Royal Air Force. Is that correct?
It could be. The one I'm thinking about is that we did work on modifying Doolittle's B-25s. And an interesting thing is that one of the Channel 11, I think, is news anchors, his grandfather worked for Northwest, and he worked on that, and we did some research, him and I did some research, and he did a clip on his grandfather on the 80th anniversary of so that was very interesting. And the song was Your Spirit Soars, Fly with the Best, and it'll say Northwest Orient, and then it go airlines. video that shows Buster Keaton.
I want to have a whack at that.
You want to have a whack at that, okay.
I'll do like you did, just
Yeah.
tap it once or get it right in the middle.
Yep. And this is not,
No, wait a minute. We didn't get the big one
oh,
here. That resonates down to my boots.
Buster Keaton was the featured celebrity. He was sitting in a first-class seat with, at that time, the hors d'oeuvre service was called the Fujiyama tray. It was a pineapple with all the hors d'oeuvres sticking in it, and he picks off a little olive off with the toothpick, and he's got this tiny little gong, and he hits it, and it's got that huge gong. But it was Northwest Orient Bong Airlines, so that's where the gong comes from. And this is not the original gong by any means. It came from Honolulu, from a trade show. It was over there for about 30 years, and one day Wendell Anderson, the station manager, called me up and he says, "You want this thing, Wayne?" I says, "Yeah, we do." So he threw it in an airplane and we picked it up the next day and got it. So in this corner, we honor Mr. Nyrup. For the simple fact that without Mr. Nyrup, there wouldn't have been a Northwest Airlines that continued to operate. When he took over, it was in pretty bad shape. And he was well noted for his ability to run a tight ship. The thing with Mr. Nyrup is you always knew you had a company to come back to, even after the strikes. He was a good manager. He was there to run the company, and that was his life, you know.
I remember as a young businessman overlapping with his era, that one of the things that he got a lot of kudos for in the trade, in the airline trade, and in business generally as a business management position, was that he strived, and correct me if I'm wrong, to get as many aircraft on an interchangeable basis as he possibly
That's
could.
correct.
Is that?
That is correct. In fact, when we ordered the DC-10 aircraft, the airplane was designed with GE engines. And Mr. Nyrup really liked Pratt & Whitney engines. So he told Douglas, if you can make the airplane with the same engine that the 747 uses, I'll buy the airplane. And they did that. They modified the airplane, and us and JAL were the only ones that had Pratt engines on our airplanes.
Now you were on the line, you were in maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
Could you see, feel, hear, and touch that philosophy of interchangeability?
Oh, absolutely, yes, yes. That was very prevalent and very well known on the floor. I mean, it was the corporate culture at the time I worked there. Well, I smile because I had a good career there. I had good wages, good benefits, had a great place to work. Northwest had the latest and greatest. If there was improvements to the airplane and they improved the safety or the economy of the aircraft, we were probably one of the first ones to install the new stuff. It was just a good, forward-looking airline. We developed the wind shear stuff for avoidance, wind shear over the mountains. Don Sawa, who was the head of meteorology at that time, developed these things. And the story is that go flying west, the other pilots would say, we'll just follow Northwest because they know where the wind shear is. This was the coveralls that the mechanics wore, and for the life of me, I can't figure out why they would put aircraft mechanics in white coveralls when you've got the heavy grease and the oils at that time, especially on the airplane, the 80 weight oil. The story is that you wore a set of coveralls in the hangar. If you went to the ramp, you took those off and you put on a pair that only went to the ramp, You didn't work on the airplane. You walked around, you dispatched, or whatever you did, but you didn't get near grease or oil, and you had this nice white coverall to walk around on the ramp with Northwest's name on it.
Oh. Uh-huh.
But you can see, in that day and age, we didn't have the high-tech laundry detergents, and it's linen, cotton or linen, and it's stained. When I started in January '59, they were gone. They had nice gray uniforms that pretty much hid the grease and stuff. In this third section of displays, it's the modern aircraft from the 80s and 90s on up. We have everything from the 747 up through the 787, which Northwest never took. They were going to be the launch customer in the United States for the 787, but Delta hasn't picked up the options yet. This airplane here was called our World Airplane, and it celebrated our 50 years in the Orient, as you can see here. And what they did is they had a contest with school kids in the Orient and had them draw pictures, and they took those pictures, the winners, and they made huge decals of them and put it on the airplane, and they called it the World Plane. And there's still a full set of those decals someplace. It wasn't painted on, it was decals, and we only had one like that, but it was rather a striking airplane when it was set on the ramp. It was very noticeable. This airplane here, it was the one that carried the last troops out of Desert Storm, and the general was on it. And the night before the airplane left to go there, some mechanics got an idea. Can we paint a ribbon on there? So the ribbon was painted on with rollers, and it was just a one-off chance, and there's a lot of pictures of it. Schwarzkopf was the general.
Stormin' Norman.
Yeah, Stormin' Norman. Up here we have a wooden propeller. That was the type of propeller that was on the first mail planes. They're hand carved out of laminated wood, and Howard here was the guy that carved the propeller, and you can't read it, but his name is on there. And when he was doing it, it was all hand carved. Later they did have machines that carved it.
Is that a Jenny that he's pulling through?
It's probably a Jenny, yeah. It's probably a green platform.
And what's this?
This here is a truck that after they overhauled the engines in St. Paul, they had this thing called a chub, and it's a thick-bladed, short propeller, and they'd go out in the middle of the airport and test the engine on that truck and adjust it and whatever they had to do with it. I never got involved with that, but that engine there that is shown is the one that's on the Stratocruiser. This table here is of interest. The placard kind of tells it all. It was a reservationist table in the Philippines, and the telephone phone came through here. You sat here with your telephone, and then all your forms, your ticket stock, the timetables, and anything else you needed were on this turntable. And as you needed it, you turned the table and got what you needed. And that was all when you hand wrote your tickets out and put them in the mail and sent them to the customer.
We've been in the company of Wayne Snyder, 44 years with Northwest, retired as Vice President of
Operations here at the History Center.
And he's taken us through the tour of the History Center, which is just an amazing
accumulation of a lot of history and covers an awful lot of aviation history that applies really all over the world, but in this case with specific focus on Northwest Orient, including the big gong.
Right,
that
the
we
gong,
heard
yes,
in
don't
the
forget the
earlier
gong.
period. But I'd like to end up by saying, number one, they're looking for people who would volunteer to come in and I suppose in a way become docents for the operation. And Wayne would be one of your first people that you want to contact. The second part of it is any museum needs donations. I don't happen to have a coin in my pot, not even a Bitcoin, but donations. And if you're in love with aviation, whether you have any connection with Northwest or not, they gladly accept donations. The other one is, and again, because it's a museum and there's no particular sign for this, so my hand writing isn't all that good, but it says donate memorabilia. And you may have in your closet at home something that is part of Northwest aviation history. Wayne and his people would be interested in talking to you to see if it fits a need, fills a gap here in the...
Yes. Yes, we do accept everything that people are willing to donate. We accept it, and it goes into our computer system, and we have a lot of stuff in storage, but we always are looking for things that will complete a certain collection or of memorabilia, whether it's timetables or ticket jackets or whatever. There's always room for more. And we do need donations. We, after this building got sold, we now have substantial monthly monetary responsibilities that in order to keep the History Center here. So we do need monetary donations as well.
Well, let me tell the people that, as I understand it, based on this tour, is that yes, you have short-term monetary needs, but the good news is that you can see far out to 2020 when this museum may be part of a larger agglomeration of museums over on the old Officers Row at Fort Snelling, adjacent to the airport. So we invite all of you out there to come take a visit and then see if there's one of these areas that you can make a contribution in. Wayne Snyder, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in. It was enjoyable. Thank you.